it's Stacey with Sew Steady, and we are here live with Angie Atwood. Angela, thank you so much for creating such an amazing project for our club boxes. We are going to be sharing with you some awesome just inspiration, but every single club box member got this pattern and project in their box. So please tell them a little bit about what you're going to be sharing today.
Well, Stacey, it's great to be here. It's been a while. So I hope everyone's enjoyed looking at or even making. I've seen a few makes online, so that's great, waiting for the quilting class. So today, because I specialise in the quilting, I thought I'd do more of an in-depth class on why I've designed the quilting this way around the seams of the patchwork. And then run through, as you know, the pattern's got several different options for design with these two templates. So I'm going to be running through in depth of the quilting designs. And when I teach normally, I find it really useful to work on paper so that people can see more clearly before it goes to the machine. So that's what the class is going to include today. We're going to work half of it on paper, so we get all of our things worked out before we get stressed on the machine. And then there'll be an additional bonus class because I recorded too much for today. So, and there's a couple of other designs covered in a bonus class that will be on the university for Elevate subscription members.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing expertise and designs. I always love sharing what you have. I feel like, you do such an amazing job, not just quilting and teaching, but just in your overall layouts and your patterns. They're so detailed and so easy to follow. And I know we all kind of learn differently. So having that written instruction and be so thorough and easy to follow is just something that you can't do without. So if you don't already have the pattern, it is for sale on our website. So you can purchase the pattern separate if you're not one of our Club Box members. And then, of course, you will be able to purchase the class on the university as well. So I'll share some different ways, if you're not a Club Box member, how you can access it. If you are a Club Box member, you get access to us. Yes. It's all in your membership. So excellent. Well, then let's go ahead and have your video take it away. We'll be here to answer questions for all of you. So we'll plan on checking in at the end and making sure we cover everything. Otherwise, we'll cover a lot of those questions in the comments. So thank you again, Angie, and we will play your video now. Bye-bye.
Where we're going to be specifically looking at the quilting side and quilting design options of Delectably Dashing mini project. The project came in the Elevate Club Box Q3, the patchwork project, and also the templates that we're going to be using today. Butterflies in Flight, which also includes a few ovals, and Spinifex 7, 3-inch and 5-inch. If you're viewing this class outside of the Elevate Club box, then the templates can be purchased separately. Within the pattern, what I tried to do is to give lots of different options for quilting the project, using both of these templates and elements of them. There are very many variations, which I'll run through with you. You also have a sheet in the center. It's to scale, so you can place the templates on this to draw and test out your designs. And then there are more options on the back, designed without the butterfly template, just using the Spinifex and some of the ovals. There's a lot going on with this Butterflies in Flight template, despite its simple name. There are several ovals and this nice sort of curly swirl joining mechanism. Whenever I receive a new template, before I take it to the machine, I always like to play on paper first to get to know the template, feel how it feels, have a look at how it stitches out and what the variations are. So I think that's what we're going to do first today. Many of you already know how to use the templates and often struggle with design or variations of design, and so that's what I'm going to be concentrating on today. So the first thing we're going to look at are the variations of what this template offers us. We have 3 different oval shapes here within the butterfly, which we'll come back to. We'll start by talking about the butterfly shape itself. So the butterfly will actually give us, because the inner cutout has been included in the template, we can actually have 2 different sizes of butterfly. If we stitch around the inside of this shape, the actual stitching size is shown upon the guidelines of the inner cutout there that you can see. And therefore, if you stitch around the outside of the shape, then your stitching, instead of being on this line here, your stitching will be 1/4 of an inch away. So it'll be 1/2 an inch bigger than the inner shape. So let's just take a look at that and see how that works. So I'm just going to have a play here with my stitching line disc. I would normally use a stitching line disc with a finer hole in it than this one, with a very fine mechanical pencil. That's what I find best for accuracy. However, to enable it to show up on screen, I want to use a black pen, so the nib is quite thick. So with this template, you can actually start anywhere, but we do have a guideline here and here to center the butterfly. This is always a good idea as well for reference. So when you get a new template, if you draw it out or stitch it out and keep it as a reference file, when you're looking for shapes and sizes to fit in on a project, it's great to have something like this, a scrapbook to look back on and look at the certain sizes of templates and the shapes of them, rather than just looking at the template in the packet, which doesn't really show the full detail of the patterns. Okay, so we can go, doesn't really matter which way we go around. We follow the shape around. By drawing it out as well, you get a feel for where there are any sharp changes of direction or where you might naturally need to slow down with the machine. Here we're coming on quite a sharp angle change. Obviously on paper it's not quite as accurate as stitching it out, because we do have a little bit of leeway in the hole there of the stitching line disc, so you can see my body here is just overlapping the nice central line that we've got there to work from. And then if we wanted to flip the template, holding the stitching line disc still as possible, the body guideline here is over the one that we've already stitched, and so we can then continue and repeat the process. Our guidelines are both lined up, so you can see we get a little tiny overlap at the bottom of the butterfly. That may or may not bother you, or it may not happen when you stitch it out, just the little bit of leeway there in the larger hole of the stitching line disc. Okay, so that's fairly simple to follow the butterfly around to give you the open butterfly in flight. And as I mentioned before, if I pop the inner insert over the top now, then you can see that the guidelines on the cutout give you the exact measurement of what stitches out. But we can use this part of the template on its own as well. There aren't so many guidelines here to align up, but if you did want to use it in a similar fashion, there's nothing to stop you putting your own guideline or ruler stick arrow to give you some indication of where to align the shape centrally. It might be, if you're using it to echo the shape, then you can place it on top of the shape you've already stitched, like we have here. I'm just going to follow this round and see what it gives us. You may only use it on the outside of the shape. You may not echo the inner pattern, but we're just having a play here with design and seeing what happens. Flipping the template, laying the guidelines over the top once again, and I'm just going to go from that central position. And as I say, drawing things out sometimes gives you an idea of where you might have a little bit of a wobble or what might happen. Okay, but you can see the outer shape there is much, much larger. And even if you didn't echo the inner head and body, it would give you a nice echoed butterfly shape, possibly of use if you were using it with applique as well. Okay, now let's take a look at the oval inside the butterfly. And one thing I'd like to point out again is that we've got two sizes here. We've got the inner and the outer shape. So we've got the inner shape here, which is 1 inch by 2 inch. And the inner cutout part is actually marked as 1.5 by 3, but it does actually stitch out to 2 by 3. I have made a note of this in the pattern book here. But again, this is something that you really benefit from, having a play with the templates initially and seeing how they stitch out. We'll pop this in the centre here, over the top of where it sits in the butterfly, because I'll talk to you about the positioning of this as we look at the designs separately. So there's the inner shape. Obviously, if we didn't have the bigger echo, this would be floating inside this shape. You can also put the ovals coming off the body, but again, we'll talk about that later. And then this shape is much, much bigger. Let's see if I can pop this one. So again, there would be 1/2 inch difference between these because of the 1/4 inch of your ruler foot. So the inner one is 1 inch by 2 and the larger one 2 inches wide by 3. So really, really useful shapes, especially on our 6-inch block that we're using with the churn dash pattern. We have 2 more ovals on this template, and it might confuse you again with the sizes that are listed. Because this is listed as a 1.5 inch and a 2.5 inch oval, but of course the cutouts are only 1.25, so stitched out it would be even smaller, and this oval is 1 3/4. The sizing refers to it being stitched out as a spinifex. So the key there is that this is called a spinifex design, whereas these are called a simple oval. So don't be mistaken there. Grab this template thinking it's going to stitch you a 1.5 or 2.5 inch oval, and then realise that that's not what it's going to give you. So let's take a look at those stitched out as spinifex. Firstly, we'll need a small crosshair. Okay, so the larger of the spinifex here, we have a central guideline, and you will also see that there are sort of baseline, which is giving you the widest point of the shape, actually, what the shape will actually stitch out at as one side of the oval. It's 1 1/4. So hopefully that will make sense as to why you get a 2.5 inch spinifex pattern. So by using the horizontal and the vertical on my crosshair, there we go. It's actually a lot smaller when you actually see it stitched out to how big the template feels when you visually look at it. So again, a really good idea to do this to give you a better feel for the shape and size of a pattern. When I'm stitching any rotations, 4 or 8 rotations, I tend to always work in opposites rather than in the round if I was working around a pattern. A, because I think it pulls the wadding in a little bit more uniform, rather than you can imagine stitching something in the round. With smaller shapes, maybe not quite so important, but if you're doing a big spinifex, then you'd get a lot of twist and pull. So I'm just working around, lining up the guidelines, 2 central ones, and then the baseline at the end of the oval is across the centre. And you can see this sweet little design, a 2.5 inch pattern. Again, really good to keep a scrapbook of all these with annotations on. and much quicker and less stressful than doing it on the machine for the first time. And then the smaller Spinifex has exactly the same markings. We've got top and bottom, which will give you alignments for aligning it as a Spinifex. There's also some extra 1/4 inch ones here if you wanted to sort of position it away from the center. So let's give that a go with this one. So you can stitch it out exactly the same as this, and it would give you 1.5 inch if stitched out this way. But if we wanted to use it away from the center, then we've got a 1/4 inch, first 1/4 inch line here, which is actually 1/2 inch away from the bottom of the oval, and then there's another 1/4 inch there. So if we align that crossbar, it means that my actual oval is not going to overlap. It will have space in the center. So here we have this tiny sweet little oval, and then if we were to pivot and align, again we've got vertically central and the bottom one of those shapes. So you have a lot going on in this template. Obviously I'm stitching these all as individuals, or you could in fact make it really, really sweet if you could stitch down into the center and back out, and it would make a nice little design. What you would need to do in that case is your gap is 3/4 of an inch. So as you worked around, you would mark your 3/4 of an inch, a little reference point. And then you could just use the size of the side of the ruler and your 1/4 inch spacing gauge to stitch down to the center, measure with your spacing gauge to come out to the mark, and then of course realign the template. And then you would travel back down and back out to give you that lovely, it's almost like little seed heads, very sweet and organic. Far better than tying lots of loose ends in. But it just shows you the great markings that these Westerly templates do try to offer us such a lot of scope and versatility compared to some other templates. And that would give you something that far away. And then lastly, we have this stop, flip and rotate, this lovely a connecting curl that is really, really useful when stitching organic shapes with flora and fauna. Really, it's really nice to have this kind of organic little thing going on. So for instance, if you had stitched a petal shape like this, you could finish on the top or even track back down to the center where 2 petals overlap, and you could align the template and stitch out somewhere, either traveling to the next block or just organically moving on. You can work out a pattern to work exactly as you'd like it to. And then the idea being that you can flip the template and continue in lots of different ways, really. This will give you a little flick, a little curl, and then you can continue. And then you could stitch another little design with the little oval on the end. And sometimes you don't even need to have 8 rotations. Flowers can often look really nice with 5 or 6, again giving you more scope from your templates for things to look a little different. That's just quite nice. If you ignore the one that's too far out, that's actually just quite nice on its own. So as we said, there's a hell of a lot going on with just this simple template called Butterflies in Flight. Lots and lots of variations and other shapes to play with, which we'll cover a little bit more as we progress through the designs. Next, let's take a look at the Spinifex 7 that also came within the Elevate Club Box Q3. This specifically is 3 inch and 5 inch. So if you already have a set of Spinifex, these are 2 sizes that have never been produced before. Again, looking at the markings on the templates, we have central lines for aligning centrally on a design. We've also got some extra 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch horizontals there to do what we just did with the little one, not have things overlapping from the center. So if you're avoiding having too much thread build up perhaps in a design, or just want something a little bit more open. And then we've got some other various lines there at different degrees. Okay, so I've drawn a crosshair. This is going to stitch out as a 5-inch design, the larger one. So I'm placing my template centrally on there, and literally where your needle will be in the center of your crosshair gives you your starting position, because you're tucked right in the pointed end of the shape. So this is very pointed at one end and very oval at the other end. So it sits very nicely actually with the oval templates within the box set. Again, I'm going to pivot this round and draw this out in opposites. Then we just make sure it's centered this way. So that's what 4 looks like. Again, quite nice to see what things look like before you put this onto a project. And then if we continue with the rotations, we do actually get a lovely shape where they overlap. It's almost like an elongated diamond when we stitch this out, pointy end in, as I like to call it. Okay, so now let's look at the opposite way round by stitching it with the pointy end out, which sometimes when you look at a template it may not seem that obvious that you can use it both ways round, because the majority of the markings will be at one end. So I'm just going to draw another crosshair, maybe just half of one. And let's see what this looks like using it the opposite way around. So I'm aligning this end, the guidelines top and bottom once again. Again, if you were using this a lot in this direction, then maybe you could mark your own guideline if you feel that you needed it. So we just have to make sure that we're sitting properly at the bottom of the curve. Just making sure that I was on the screen then as well, because often you're drawing away and I'm off the edge of the screen or the paper. Could have moved my crosshair a little bit further in, but we're going to get the idea of half the design anyway, for sure. So it's quite different, but it's actually really, really lovely. And the change of direction here kind of really makes quite a nice shape. So when you look at the designs that I've given you here in the pattern, you can see this one actually is using it pointy end out, 2 corners done with pointy end out and 2 done with pointy end in. So you can see they look like totally different templates. So there again, you're making your Spinifex 7 go much further and give much more variation. Okay, so we can have a little look at what the little ones look like. You can now see actually when I rotate to do this west side, and you can see one of the guidelines here is lining up. In fact, those 2 should line up on the 45 degree. Really, really pretty. Fits so well with the ovals, with the one end being very oval shaped. So now that we've got to grips with how the templates work and what's available to us, we'll take a look at how I've applied them to the Delectably Dashing mini pattern. Okay, so taking a look at the general feel of the quilting design using the butterflies in flight and Spinifex 7, you can see we have the corners and the center, we're using the Spinifex 7 in rotation. And then in the other areas around that, 4 sides of the on point square and northeast southwest of the on point churn dash, I've used the very open shape of the butterfly. One consideration when looking at the design, which I mention in the pattern, is to also look at a bit of seam avoidance. If you've already made the project, or if you're familiar with this kind of patchwork, there will be a lot of seams to navigate. Since specialising in quilting, I now press all my seams open. I was going to show you the back of this before I basted it, but you can see by pressing seams open, you get a much flatter project when it comes to quilting. Sometimes I try and do one in the traditional manner, pressing to the dark side, and another block pressing open, and see which one I prefer. And my centre one is actually done in the traditional manner, and it definitely feels thicker and heavier around these areas here. So the ones where my seams are open sit much flatter. In order to stitch, obviously, 8 rotations of the Spinifex 7, we're going to need some guidelines. We'll need to find the centre of the churn dash. What we can do is use the reference points sometimes through the points and the piecing where possible, and you don't need to draw huge lines all over your project. You can see here on these examples here, I put very short bursts of line, not full lines. I've just kind of aligned the template to see how big a line I need. Basically looking at, if I wanted to position the larger Spinifex 7 here, I know I'm going to need a reference point in this area. So I've put myself the white chalk pencil mark in the outside. And if I were using the smaller of the template shapes, then I need something a little bit further in, so you don't have to draw full lines. Positioning the Spinifex is a lot more straightforward than the butterflies in the design. However, the difference in shape will really help you to avoid some of the seams. So the larger template of the two will definitely avoid any of the seams. So that works really well. And if we turn it this way, that is also going to avoid any of the horrible seams to stitch over. When it comes to the smaller template, sometimes a lot of quilting designs will suggest pivoting from an actual cross in the patchwork, which it means that we can use the seams as a crosshair, but it's not particularly helpful to have all that stitching coming back and meeting on a spot. So by positioning the Spinifex in the centre of the block, where there are no seams, this will skirt around the edge. So if you're thinking of 1/4 of an inch, it's going to come pretty close, and it will be within the seam allowance. So you might have, if you've pressed traditionally to one side and you've got more bulk, you still may suffer here with a little bit of clashing into thick seams and have to adjust the foot height. I think even more so using the template this way around, because you will definitely then be sort of stitching into that point. You can actually put a large Spinifex in the centre and have it overlapping the bottom of the butterflies, which I think is quite nice. I quite like the way it overlaps because the butterflies overlap as well. So I think it works. But if you particularly like the smaller designs, one thing that I've done here in figure 1 is, instead of drawing the crosshair to the northeast southwest, I've just pivoted it round so that your petals aren't going to the 45-degree line. They're just offset. So in fact, if you stitched an 8-point crosshair or drew an 8-point crosshair and then you go in between with 16, it's basically where the 16-point would land. Just putting this extra little bit of thought will really help you. So as you can see with the big crosshair, it's sat on top of my 6-inch block, and there's your normal vertical and horizontal. And then if you pivot round and align the guidelines on the northeast southwest, then the in-between lines, it's still an 8 rotation, but they're offset, will mean that your petals will actually miss the worst parts of your chunky seams. although we've just been talking about it's really helpful to work on paper. I've got some printouts here as well, so you could photocopy this or work in friction pen over the top so that you can keep ironing or rubbing it out to try different designs. So I thought this would be really helpful. It sets you on a path to work out the positioning of things, which is great. But obviously it's a flat piece of paper, so we're not always considering quite how difficult thick seams are going to be. So sometimes it's really good to work out your stitching route, the general design, and then when it comes to actually applying it to the project for real, there may be a few other things for you to navigate that you hadn't considered. And so at this point then, it's not a problem to just tweak or adjust the design. So throughout the pattern, we've got variations of pointy end out, small in the middle, and then with the other designs, this one is with the oval side on the outside, so pointy end in, small in the middle again and offset. A large Spinifex 7 in the middle, which we just discussed in 1A, where the ovals are overlapping the butterflies. This one is actually using the Spinifex 7 pointy end out, but just to the northeast southwest, and then pivoting the template round and stitching round. It fits perfectly in that shape, but you may not want that much quilting. You might prefer a little bit of open space, and there are just four petals there on the inside. This one is all pointy end out, and then the other variations just at the top here before we move on to variations without the butterfly. We have 4 big ones and 4 small ones, and 4 out and 4 pointing in. So as I say, lots and lots of variations for you to consider. The big ones are the best at avoiding thick seams, but you can offset the center one. So figure 1 is the reference of offsetting that little center Spinifex. So the next thing to look at is the positioning of the butterfly template, which is a little bit more difficult if we look at positioning it around the center. And one thing to bear in mind is to center the circle within the band, so that will give you an indication, and then hopefully the body again skirts round the seam. You can see here we've got the guideline, and on paper you can see how we can align up, center the actual butterfly template, but then it's a matter of centering the circle within this band. And so if you look at the actual cutout of the shape, obviously your needle is going to be 1/4 inch in from each side. So if you can center the aperture, then you should be well on the way to kind of having that centered within the shape. So I'm just doing that by eye. There's kind of like a millimeter or 2 at top and bottom. And let me see what it looks like on the actual pattern rather than my printout. This might show it a little easier. Yeah, so centered there, centered there. This is visually centered within the band. And a really good reference point that I'm seeing here is this horizontal here is actually a really good indication because it's just sitting on the top of the band there. So that could be quite a nice extra reference point for you to look at. Again, if you would like to draw yourself extra markings on the template, go ahead and do that. I do it all the time. My templates are covered in Chinograph lines and my ruler stickers. And then if I take a look at this on the patchwork itself, we've got our 45 degree, which gives us our central line. And you can see that we can align the template top and bottom. And then after that, really, we're visually putting this semicircle in the center. You can see there's just kind of a fraction of template there and there. And that's looking pretty close to sitting there, isn't it? So that would be a good indication. Also, the outside of the template here is pretty level with the top of the band. And you can see there, when we come to stitch this, that we should avoid the worst of the seams. And it fills the space really, really well. When it comes to the floating ovals in the design, as they appear in the template, you can stitch these on their own and tie in ends, or you could join them to the body of the butterfly. either with a line, so position them in the same place, or you will see many variations and design choices where they actually come off the body. So as you are stitching around the body, you would stop and stitch the oval and then continue. So that's something you can do as well. One thing that I'm going to look at is actually traveling, using the seams to travel down. So because we have a seam here, one thing that I'd like to do is use the seams as a place to travel. Again, something that's not too obvious when looking at the paper pattern. But what you could do is, as you stitch around the body of the butterfly, when we get to this point, we could use the seam to travel inwards and then stitch the oval, stitch back out and continue. Or we could actually come off from here. This might be more natural because it is actually coming off the body. So what I'm going to do there, I'm going to put myself a reference mark, and that's where I'm going to stitch out to. Okay, so if I flip over and do exactly the same, you will get a slight difference reflection of the guidelines, not quite the same looking at it from the back side as the top, where we are there. Then I'm just going to press this down. Okay, so let's measure where they are. So if they're an easy measurement, they're going to be 7/8, 7/8 from the tip. So that is something that you could mark on each four in order to be able to stitch the inner oval to appear as though it's floating within that shape, if you like it that way, because your stitches will be hidden in there. Exactly the same on the top section. I've just had to give myself a central reference point. I'm having this as a cushion, not as a wall hanging, so I'm not adding any borders. So I've just given myself a line there. On the pattern, we are very, very close to the edge. And I think that the circle is sitting slightly closer to the orange triangle there than the top. So slightly different positioning. So line up those and just have it sitting slightly down. If you wanted to align the top of the outside of the template, you'd know that your stitches are going to be 1/4 of an inch in, and it will pass round. It'll come close to this seam, but not on the seam, just at the edge. And again here, it will scoot around the outside of that seam. So that's probably a good position for it on the northeast southwest blocks. So really, really good to have a look at all this before you kind of go racing away on the machine, just to give yourself some good markings. It's often easier to give yourself some reference guides before you've layered up with wadding as well, so that you get much sharper, precise markings. But really, really good to do all this before being under the machine, not being able to see very well, and having a plan before you attack the quilting. Okay, so we're over at the machine, all set up, ready to start some stitching. I've changed the needle, just need to check the height of the foot, and of course with a patchwork piece we have the seams to consider as well. I'm using a very lofty wadding, but as you can see, it's okay if the foot depresses the lofty wadding, as long as I can still freely move the quilt sandwich. What you'll notice here is the height of the foot looks okay here, but as we approach one of the seams, you can see that the foot's catching. So what we need to do is adjust the height of the foot a little so that we can freely move over those seams. And just to mention, this middle churn dash block was the one that I didn't press the seams open, so this is pressed to one side in the traditional manner. So I'll just take a screwdriver, just loosen off the foot, and we can see how low we can get it. That seems a little better. We're okay there. So we've checked all those, and hopefully that will be much better. I've decided to stitch the offset 8-pointed flower in the centre of figure 1 there. We'll bring our thread up right on the centre of the crosshair I've previously marked. Just a little securing stitch. We'll have to see how we get on with the foot sitting a little higher than it would normally in the shallow areas in order to get over the more lumpy seams. If we do encounter some stitch issues, then we'll need to adjust the height of the foot as we're stitching. But we'll see how we get on to begin with. So I'm going to introduce the small end of the Spinifex 7, and I don't want it to go to the exact vertical northeast southwest. We're going to stitch it to the one either side of those. So there's my first alignment, and I've got this horizontal lining up with the east marker of that crosshair as well. So small shapes can often feel a little bit aggressive in their direction change. This is a nice smooth part of the shape, but we are changing aggressively on that little bend. So, you know, it's normal to get maybe a little jump in stitches there, or to just take it easy and be aware of that. I'm going to try and stitch in opposites, as I often recommend. So here I can use this central marker to line up with the one I've just stitched, the horizontal one here to the west, and then I should be able to just check the one at the back, smooth the quilt sandwich out, make sure I've got no threads in the way, would be useful. So you can hear the needle pipping just a little bit because of the height it's sitting in that central area where it's not sort of tight onto the seam. It could also be the nature of the wadding. I'm actually testing a new wadding here, something I've never used before. Every time you come back to the centre, just make sure you are exactly on the centre to keep that centre nice and tidy. So we don't want the 45 degree, we want the one just to one side of it. And you can see this guideline here sitting over the one we've just stitched, and this guideline here directly south, all lining up lovely. I may actually just try and drop the height of the foot a fraction. You can see there's a definite shadow under the foot, so that's causing the foot to just jump a little. You can see it just naturally dropped, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be too tight as we approach this seam. So we'll just see how it goes. Notice this totally different sound. Just watch this jump in this angle here. We get that beautiful little shape where they cross over. So I shall continue in this vein until I've got all 8 stitched. And by making sure that your alignment is as accurate as possible, will hopefully give us that lovely uniform crossover. So I'm going to stop when I get to the top of the petal. So because these are going to be stitched over, I am just going to chop these off because we've stitched over them numerous times, so they'll be absolutely secure. I can hopefully reposition the template pretty easily. And then the final one. Okay, with the template out, what I am going to do is just stitch out on one of these previous lines, just to bring me out from the centre a little for tying in. It's going to be very, very dense in the centre, therefore that's going to be impossible to be pushing a needle in. So I'm just going to tie off my ends here, just a little way out. And we have our centre. So next up we're going to look at the 4 butterflies that sit around the centre. So we're working from the centre out. So we need our butterflies in flight template, and we're going to be looking at these 4 butterflies here. So what I'm going to try and do is actually stitch out from the body with the stitch line sitting in the ditch, so it'll be less visible. So as you can see, we are going to look to centre the circular part of the butterfly within the band, and then we've got our centre marks top and bottom. and the body will miss the main thickness of that seam. And there is my reference. So what I'm hoping to do is to track out to that reference point, so roughly 1/4 of an inch in, and then I'll be able to stitch the oval and come back out. That's the plan anyhow. First of all, I'm going to check the height of my foot over these areas. So let's have a look with the template in position, and without stitching, let's see if I can actually move around the shape. A little bit sticky there, that's a thick bit, so no. So we definitely need to adjust the height of the foot here. What I'm going to do is just come up to this area here, undo the foot. You see it naturally rises on its own. So yeah, that looks good. Again, it might be making a bit of a sound over the more open areas, but that's looking quite good. Now we can position, turn this around so that you can see the angles. Looking at the circular part of the motif, we're a couple of mil over there and a couple of mil over there, and then I'm just using this reference line, which we spoke about when we were testing it on a drawing, to just lay vertical actually over that band. Okay, here we go. Hear the pipping sound again, just because the foot is sitting a little higher than we would naturally want, but because of the seams in patchwork, something we kind of have to put up with. If it was causing us an issue, we may have to lower the foot in sections. So you could drop the foot down to do areas where it doesn't need to be as high, and then adjust it each time you come near a seam. Turn this around so that you can see a little better. And now we're going to put the centre part in, and then hopefully we'll be able to travel down here to this point. So you can use a straight line ruler or just free motion, taking it nice and easy. And then hopefully we'll be able to position this with the guidelines roughly over the top. That works great. But then we can stitch around this. Up to the seam and then back down the seam. What I'm going to do before I do that is just nip off those ends. There we go. And as we know from the pattern of the butterfly, they cross over at the top and the bottom of the circle there and the bottom of the wings. Flip the template, hopefully do the same on this side. So we're aligning centrally each side. I spin it round so that you can see, and this guideline once again, and the whole template sitting kind of parallel with these lines in the patchwork. They're a good reference, aren't they? And centered top and bottom. Smooth out that squidgy wadding, and we're going to do the other side of the butterfly. And we're being careful here as we come round where our bottom of the butterfly is going to meet up to the seam. What I could do here, I think I'm going to do, is actually just finish off this part of the body and come back down. Then we're going to track out along that seam. Got my little reference marker there. Introduce the other part of the template. Of course, when you're flipping templates, you also need staple tape on both sides. And then we could cut the threads there and tie in the ends because we already completed the top part of the butterfly. Let's take this out and line up the next one. So I'm really pleased with that, so I'll do a few more. Next, we're going to repeat the same process, but by looking at stitching the butterflies northeast, southwest over the little triangle. And again, it looks like we'll be able to use the seam of that to be able to travel out to our ovals to make it look like they're floating. And we're going to put the head of the butterfly as close as possible to the top of that triangle so that we don't stitch too close to the edge. So this time we are still aligning the vertical on this template. This is the area that we're going to be looking at, making sure that this is going to skim inside. We could have the head of the butterfly, the circle, actually sitting on that, which would give this good space inside. When we came around here, we would just miss touching that oval there. So maybe we'll just tweak that up a little to make sure that we're going to miss those. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Again, trying to smooth out. It's never easy stitching right near the edge of a quilt sandwich, and I did actually consider putting a temporary border on this and then unpicking it afterwards, which is something that you could always consider if you're having difficulty. And I'm just going to bring my needle up on the centre line. Sometimes tricky past that little notch in the template. Let's just move out and see how we can best align. Different measurement with this one, that's okay. I could just stitch the oval from where I was. Oh, that's a good reference guideline there that's on the side of the triangle as well, isn't it? That's a good one. I always say with these things, they look beautiful when they're done. And so any little wobbles or mistakes that you make, over stitching, does it really matter? It'll be finished, beautifully quilted, and you completed it yourself. You don't need to keep stopping and unpicking all of your errors. Keep going. I'm going to turn this around a little bit because everything's hidden at the back there for you to see. Maybe I'll stitch this one this way around. So we're aligning the body, this central mark, the top mark, checking that we're not going to be going off the edge of our quilt, checking that we're not overlapping there. We shall just skim there with the 1/4 inch, I think, which is about right. Okay, what I will do before we go to the other side is take a rough measurement of where we need to be from the centre. And this side, it's more like 3/4. So let's go to about there. You'll notice that this isn't the fastest design you'll ever stitch. Some projects are like that. Some projects, it's nice to take your time, do something a little bit special. You're not going to take this much time over every project. You have something quick to stitch, baby quilt or some everyday table napkins or something. Sometimes it's nice to plan a bit more of an intricate design. And take your time with it. I love that about ruler quilting. So we've completed the shape, come back to seam. Travel along the seam. Look at that. Line up the template. Perfect. And now we can see with our northeast southwest butterflies how they will sit over the top of the orange triangle there, overlapping the side ones. So I'll get the other 3 of these in before then we stitch the final spinifex in the corners. So I have this corner already marked up with an 8-point crosshair ready to go. And we have a choice whether we stitch them pointy end out or pointy end in. So maybe I'll do 2 of each. Again, we're able to get into our template easily with the cutout, and I'm aligning up here at the top center and just taking a quick look at the back. So you saw me then just get stop at, I thought it was at the height of the seam, but it wasn't. It was at that. That doesn't look like such a severe change of direction, but it can feel like that sometimes, especially after going around a lovely curve. Again, I'm working in opposites. So going this way, you just kind of tumble to the side to the wider oval. I could have adjusted my foot height, so I'm not necessarily near any seams here. Sounding as if the foot is a little high, but we're not getting any stitch issues, so we're okay at the moment. And what I'm going to do is just stop there, nip those off. And I mentioned earlier that I'm testing a new wadding. I enjoy using wool wadding, which is has a nice loft. This is a Vlizoline Eco wadding, which is biodegradable. So it will biodegrade when it's in contact with the soil, but it has a very wool-like appearance, and so far so good. It felt extremely lofty, I'd say even loftier than wool, but it hasn't given me any major stitching issues, which is great. And of course, the beauty of the Spinifex is they're so easy to use. You don't have to keep turning quilt projects, but great guidelines as well, as always on the Westerly templates. Lots of reference points for accuracy. It almost creates like a snowflake pattern in the center where it overlaps. So that's good sometimes if you can't quite see the marker back here, especially if you wear varifocal glasses. It's nice to have the other reference points that you can align to as well, so you've got more than one check. And on that last one, if you remember last time when we stitched the center, just so that we don't end the threads on a really thick center point, which is going to be horrendous if not impossible to push a needle through when you tie in your ends, then just stitch a few stitches away from the center before you tie in your ends. There we have lovely 5-inch, yes, isn't it? 5-inch Spinifex 7 stitched over the top of one of the churn dash blocks, and fills that area really nicely, avoids all of the major seams the bigger Spinifex does, and sits nicely opposite the other quilting. So we'll get those other corners stitched in. I'll do another one like this and two the opposite way around, I think. So here's the other churn dash Spinifex corner with the Spinifex 7 the other way around. Turning it around just so that you can see, just aligning here, and a visual reference as well at the width of the acrylic here at the side within the square that you're stitching. I just adjusted slightly off center there by my mark where the template was sitting. It didn't look quite centered. This one, it looks better. So maybe my marking was just slightly off. Just going to stop halfway here just to allow me to nip off those ends, which I have managed to stitch down. Okay, managed to get them out. So this part of the pattern is quite quick and easy compared to the fiddly bit with the butterflies. So I feel like you're catching back up with time spent on something that needed a little bit more consideration. And then this comes together really quickly. Well, that's that all quilted. I have to say I'm really pleased with that. What I think you can see is that even if you're not too keen on butterfly graphics, it's actually not that noticeable that it is a butterfly. You see the ovals quite strongly, and they're just nice round shapes to contrast to the sharpness of the patchwork. And depending on how much quilting you like or dislike, how heavily you like a piece to be quilted, you'll see on some of the design options you could have put Spinifex number 7 in this area here, or of course doing something completely different. The little circles are quite nice, or the other little ovals you've got. You could actually stitch some ovals in this space as well, or just enjoy that little bit of a pop that isn't quilted. It'll look better once I've taken all my marks off, of course, as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I hope it's given you some insight into what I think about before I start quilting, the quilting design process before you take to the machine, and hopefully inspired you, given you a few hints and tips that you haven't already come across, a different perspective, a different way of looking at things, which is always great. It's why it's great to get together, isn't it, and share our ways of quilting. Do sign up to my newsletter to hear of future new pattern releases. You'll find me at angieatwood.co.uk. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you in another class.
Oh, I was muted.
I thought it was me.
No, that was amazing. And I can equally say that everyone else absolutely loved your project and your designs. If you haven't already seen these, I would definitely get her pattern. Her class should be available on our Sew Steady University shortly. You'll look it up under Delectably Dashing, and I can post a link to our university to get you started there, and it should be available shortly. But absolutely loving all of your quilt designs and taking advantage of those gorgeous new rulers, right, in the box. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Stacey, I was just thinking, I've really enjoyed being part of the Elevate Club box. So, it's been really fun to do this pattern, and and really great to see all the comments. So I hope everyone enjoys it. And if you don't like butterflies, there's a bonus class with more designs with no butterflies.
It's not for everyone, but but yes, we do have a lot of other design options within that. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I see you answered most of the questions in regards to your machine and the extension tables and all that good stuff. I even saw one of our gliders there on your table for doing the quilting. Yeah. Gliders are important, everyone. In fact, if you haven't already noticed, we are doing a promotion this quarter for National Sewing Month, and we are doing a giveaway for our gliders. Every 100 people that like, comment, or share on our Facebook page get to enter into winning one. So every 100 people, we will announce a new winner. We're really close to announcing our second winner right now, but all through the month, we're giving away grid gliders. And anytime you purchase a Sew Steady table, you get a 50% off a grid glider or a cabinet insert. So if you're going to do either one of those, take advantage of that discount, because a glider is absolutely amazing. And
I always say, Stacey, when I understand that you're buying a lot of kit initially when you're buying into the ruler quilting system, but I always say add it as soon as you can afford it, because it makes a huge difference.
It really, really helps. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for all of the amazing designs. Check out more of those designs on the Sew Steady University. If you're a club member, you've got those right there in in your class. And if not, you can purchase. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and we'll look to see you again soon.